Hi, I'm Shashank Bhargava, and you're listening to Three Things, the Indian Express news show. In this episode, we talk about why people in Kerala have been protesting against the SilverLine rail project. We also talk about a major examination paper being leaked in Rajasthan. But first, we talk about Pegasus. Last year, a global consortium of media groups had revealed that a powerful spyware called Pegasus was used by several governments to target and snoop on journalists, opponents, and businessmen. This included journalists and ministers from India as well. This spyware was developed by an Israeli firm called NSO. Now, when this report came out last year, the suspicion was that the Indian government had used this spyware to snoop on its own citizens. But the government didn't say anything about it. But now, a year-long investigation by the New York Times has revealed, among other things, that the Indian government bought Pegasus in 2017. In this segment, Indian Express's Krishn Kaushik joins us to talk about this investigation. This conversation with Krishn was recorded yesterday on a slightly patchy phone network. We apologize for the audio. Krishn, last year we had learned that Pegasus was used to target journalists, businessmen, ministers, and opposition leaders in India. Could you remind us what this spyware is capable of doing?
So what this spyware called Pegasus allows anybody who's authorized to use it to do is, it can infect actually any targeted mobile number and the mobile phone through the number, and gives the user access to the microphone of the mobile, the camera, all the files saved on the mobile, all the emails, all the messages. So essentially, it gives the user access to everything that the mobile number's user has access to on his or her mobile. And the interesting part about this spyware is that the targeted person does not need to click on any message or any link for this spyware to infect the phone, essentially. It can be done without any activity on the owner's part, the person who owns that number. So as we know till now, Pegasus has mentioned that only governments have been allowed to use it. So essentially, it allows government unprecedented surveillance powers through the person's mobile phone.
Right, and because NSO said this, because NSO has said that it only sells to vetted foreign governments, the suspicion had been that the Indian government had bought and used this spyware. But the Indian government didn't say anything about it. They did not say whether they had done this or not. But now an investigation by the New York Times has revealed that the Indian government had in fact bought Pegasus from NSO. Could you talk about what this report has revealed?
So the New York Times came out with a report late on Friday, which mentioned that in 2017, when Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi had gone to Israel, marking one of the first visits of an Indian Prime Minister to Israel, he met his counterpart, Benjamin Netanyahu, the Israeli Prime Minister, and there was a defense deal worth $2 billion. The centerpieces of that defense deal were the spyware, which is Pegasus, and also some missiles. So what New York Times, for the first time that anybody has come out and said openly now, says is that Indian government had in fact bought this spyware from the Israeli government back in 2017. Till now, neither the Indian government nor the Israeli government had come out openly and denied or confirmed that India has bought this spyware from Israel. Israeli government had just insisted multiple times that spyware is only sold to governments across the world, and the NSO group has to take permission from the Israeli government to who it is selling this spyware to. Indian government till now, whether it is in court, whether it is in the parliament, or whether in statements outside, has neither rejected nor denied. So categorically, they have not said that they have not bought it, but they haven't even confirmed if any agency which is part of the Indian government has authorized access to this spyware because they bought it from the Israeli government.
Yeah, and this report by the New York Times also mentions that the deal between India and Israel happened at a time when the relations between the two countries didn't appear that friendly. So what stands out about the timing of this deal?
So interestingly, the New York Times report calls the India-Israel relationship around that time frosty. But I'm not sure if the relationship can be called frosty because just yesterday, India celebrated 30 years of diplomatic ties with Israel. So, of course, India traditionally has taken a moral stand for the rights of the Palestinian people as well, which has always been a bone of contention in India's relationship with Israel. That is true. So what now this New York Times report mentions categorically, and it is not just restricted to India, it mentions that Israel was using this tool, the spyware, again as a centerpiece for its diplomatic efforts to, let's say, convince other governments or other countries to side with Israel on certain important issues. So it mentions that after this deal was struck, India did change some of its long-standing positions, whether it is about Israel directly or it is about Palestine or it is about certain votes in the UN. So essentially, the New York Times report is not singling out India over here, but it is mentioning how the Israeli Prime Minister of that time, Benjamin Netanyahu, used this very, very powerful spyware to encourage other governments that they will get access to this spyware if they are willing to change certain stands diplomatically.
And from this investigation, do we know which other governments also bought this spyware?
So, I mean, we should mention categorically here that the New York Times, the report, it has not substantiated that how do they know that India had bought this spyware from Israel. It is a very small element in a much larger story, which is a year-long investigation, though, all credit to them, where they may have mentioned like how diplomatically this tool has been used, and they mentioned over there how this was done in 2017 with the Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi. They have mentioned many other governments. They have mentioned the Saudi Arabian government. They have mentioned the United Arab Emirates, of course. They have mentioned Poland. They have mentioned Mexico. So they have listed out a number of countries to which the spyware was sold by the Israeli Prime Minister of that time, Benjamin Netanyahu. Not by him directly, of course, but like under his supervision and how he used it as a diplomatic tool. But while, of course, I have said that the New York Times report has not substantiated, it is still a very, very important step forward for someone to at least put out and say, yes, this has taken place and the Indian government has bought it. Why that is important is because the investigation that was brought out last year, this international consortium had investigated thousands of mobile numbers that were apparently on the targeted list, which had around 1,000 Indian numbers, which were investigated by the Wire. They did mention that these Indian numbers were targeted, but according to the data or the information that they had, it was not directly clear who had targeted them. But the people who were targeted, many of them are the current regime's political opponents, like the Congress leader Rahul Gandhi, political strategists like Prashant Kishore. There were at least 40 journalist numbers, including 3 of the Indian Express journalists. So while there were many pointers towards that, it might be the government, because first of all, it is only sold to the government. And Indian government has not taken a stand to say that it was somebody else who was trying to snoop up upon our citizens. So while the investigation by the New York Times does not provide a substantial amount of evidence about how they are aware of this deal, I will not try to negate that in any way, because it is still a very, very important step forward in the process of knowing who could it have been who has used this spyware against Indian citizens.
And what sort of political reactions have we seen since this investigation by the New York Times was published?
Well, I mean, the Congress, which is the main opposition party in the center, of course, has been demanding a thorough probe into this. And again, they came out yesterday as well. The Congress leader Rahul Gandhi came out with a statement today. P. Chidambaram has come out with a statement. The simplest question that the government needs to answer, that the opposition is saying, and which, of course, is an important question that needs answering, is, has the government bought and used this spyware against its own citizens? That's what the opposition has been saying since last year. Government has not categorically again said anything on this. Yesterday, one of the ministers of retired Army Chief General V.K. Singh actually called the New York Times Supari media. So that is a way to dismiss the entire investigation. But, this political slugfest will keep on happening. But in the process, what the question that should not be forgotten is the government needs to answer whether they have this software, spyware, whether they have had it in the past, whether they have bought it, and how they have used it and whom they've used it against.
And Krishn, since this spyware has been used to target journalists, I was just wondering what, if anything, worries you about the way the spyware has been used?
Okay, so I mean, we know for a fact that at least 40 mobile numbers of journalists were infected using this spyware. So for a journalist, one of the most important currencies that we have is like the ability to keep our sources private. That gives the sources the confidence to come out. Sources help us reveal the wrongdoing on part of the government. So if we cannot guarantee privacy or secrecy to our sources, we extremely hesitant, even fearful to come out and share things with us. If the government has access to every person I speak to, every message I get, whether I'm using encrypted messages or not, because once they're in my phone, they have access to everything on my phone, whether it is encrypted or not encrypted. So that becomes problematic. It leaves me with very little possibility, if at all, to deal with my sources, which isn't important for a journalist to ensure that secrecy. It helps us bring out the information that the government does not want us to bring out. It helps us inform the citizens about the decisions taken by the government, which ideally maybe they would not want us to be made public. So this is very, very problematic when such amount of snooping is done on journalists.
And next we talk about Kerala's SilverLine project. For the past few years, the Kerala government, led by the Left Democratic Front or LDF, has been planning to build SilverLine, which is a semi-high-speed railway project that aims to link the southern end of the state to the northern end. It's a massive undertaking that is estimated to cost nearly 64,000 crore rupees. But many people in the state have been protesting against it because the project requires land acquisition, meaning that for this railway line to be constructed, the government would need to demolish houses that are coming in the way of the Silver Line infrastructure. In this segment, we speak to Vishnu Varma, who recently reported on the protests against the railway line and who spoke to several people in the state about it. So Vishnu, for the past couple of years, we know that the Kerala government has been planning this massive Silver Line project. Could you first talk about what the government says about how this project is expected to help people?
Right. So this semi-high-speed railway corridor, aptly named as Silver Line by the Kerala government, is not a new proposal. It's been there in government files for quite some time. It was first mooted in 2009, and then subsequent governments could not act on it due to a variety of reasons. And now that the Pinarayi Vijayan government, the left government, is in its second consecutive term in office, it feels ambitious enough to undertake this massive project, which aims to connect the northern town of Kasaragod with the state capital of Trivandrum. So there are multiple objectives that the government seems to claim for this project. One, Kerala's roads are extremely clogged. They're very crowded. Kerala is also one of the most densely populated states in the country. It also has a very high growth of motor vehicles, both in terms of two-wheelers as well as four-wheelers. It records a large number of registrations of motor vehicles every year. And so because of these reasons, the roads, including the national highways which goes through the state, are incredibly clogged, because of which there is a variety of traffic jams as well. Now, the existing Indian Railways network, which also goes from Kasaragod to Trivandrum, it has a lot of curves, because of which trains usually take a long time to travel through the state as opposed to other states. For example, the fastest train on the Indian Railways network takes somewhere around 10 to 11 hours, which is the Rajasthan. So there's been a lot of demand from both people as well as government officials that people need to be able to travel faster through the state. And so this is the primary reason. And the government also hopes that with the implementation of this project, there will be new potential for infrastructure progress along the way that this rail route goes through. There could be IT parks, industrial parks, new potential, new opportunities for people to have jobs. And so these are some of the reasons that the government feels behind this ambitious project.
Okay, so for this project, one of the main things that the government needs to do going forward is to acquire land, because the railway line will run across the state. Houses, for example, would have to be removed for the line to be built. And you report that this is something that people are particularly opposed to. So tell us what the people have to say about this project and how big of a challenge is it for the government?
So if you look at the history of infrastructure projects in Kerala, be it any kind of national highway project, pipeline projects, building airports, or anything for that matter, any major infrastructural project, land acquisition has always been the biggest bottleneck. That's because demand for land is very high in Kerala. As I said, because the state is densely populated, finding a large tract of vacant land which is not owned by a private individual is extremely rare to find. So for any infrastructure project that cuts through the state, acquiring land is a huge obstacle for the government. So in this project also, acquiring land is going to be the major problem. But people generally feel that when this project is being implemented, they are not taken into confidence at the grassroots level. So one fine day, I went to this village called Noranad, which is in Alappuzha district of Kerala. And people there found out that their houses are going to be demolished as part of this railway project. When they opened their newspapers one fine day, they opened their newspapers to find that the survey numbers of their own homes, which lay on the proposed alignment, was published, which means their house is going to go.
So these people had no idea that their homes were going to be removed because of this project.
Yeah, absolutely. They don't know where the railway line is going to go through, what is the exact alignment. They have no idea. So to find that their houses are going to be demolished suddenly through newspapers is something that they cannot accept. They also say that local leaders, left leaders, CPM leaders at the local level also had promised them before these panchayat elections in 2020 that this project is not going to be implemented. They had no reason to worry whatsoever. It's not going to be implemented because it's such a massive risk anyway. It needs a lot of money. It's not going to be implemented. So they feel sort of betrayed by the government that they voted back to power, that they are undertaking such a massive project without taking them into confidence.
And even though these people, might be monetarily compensated by the government, they still don't want to leave their homes. So talk a bit about that. Like, why is it that money alone would not be enough for them?
Yeah, because I think we have to look into the psychological aspect of it. Malayalis as a people are incredibly attached to their homes. Many of them, as we've seen, Kerala has seen a large number of people migrate to the Gulf countries in search of employment. These are the not a lot of skilled people who are going far away, but because of financial reasons, they go to the Gulf. And we always see that whatever money they earn from the Gulf, building a home of their own, or buying a plot of land and building a home has always been their biggest dream. And often these are people who take out massive loans to build these homes. So there's always a lot of financial aspects to that home. So emotionally as well as financially, they say that even if you get a compensation, this is where they were born. This is their native village. They are incredibly attached to their surroundings. There are different aspects, their neighbors, their family, their friends. So there is an ecosystem around them which they do not want to leave. And so suddenly, one fine day, you come to our house and you say that you have to leave this house is something that they cannot accept. So I think there are both financial as well as psychological aspects to it.
And could you also talk about the kind of protests we have seen against this project so far?
Yeah, so there have been large-scale protests across the state. And these protests are springing up at places where officials of KRail are coming to install, say, boundary stones. So the first part of the project is where officials are installing these boundary stones to map the alignment of the proposed route. And so whenever officials come to lay a boundary stone in their village, people immediately find out and they come in large numbers and they oppose it. So there are very few places in Kerala where officials have been able to successfully install these boundary stones. Those places are very rare. But most other places, officials have not been able to carry out their work because there's also a citizen outfit called the KRail Viruddha Janagiya Sammadhi, which is orchestrating these protests across the state. And also, not just the people, even political parties are opposed. Most political parties, which are not part of the LDF, are all opposed to this project, including the Congress and BJP.
And in fact, one thing you mentioned in your report is that even some ministers within the LDF are opposed to it, but they're not really airing their voices against it.
Yeah, so this is something that a person who is in constant touch with ministers and who keeps meeting them in Trivandrum for his official work, he told me this in conference, that the ministers themselves don't want this project come up because they have their own constituencies. People in these constituencies are opposed to this project. So they are concerned about their support in their own constituencies as well. They understand the public anger against this project. So ministers themselves are not sure if this is a project right now that should be implemented in Kerala. But because the chief minister is considered to be such an authoritative leader with his own mind, and he is not someone who easily gives in to public criticism or public protest, they're not able to convince him to change his mind about the proposal, about the project.
Okay, so far we have talked about how people are opposed to the idea that houses would have to be demolished for this project. But the other thing is that there are also environmentalists who have raised concerns about it, right? So what are they saying about it?
Yes, absolutely. So Kerala, as we know, has seen back-to-back floods and landslides. It's a state that is constantly facing the vagaries of climate change. We're always seeing monsoon-related fatalities here. Kerala is also a very thin strip of land, landlocked between the backwaters. There's the sea, there are the Western Ghats. So it's an extremely fragile sort of an ecological area. There are a lot of biodiversity hotspots here. And even in the past also, when there were infrastructure projects, there are always environmental risks. So even with this project, environmentalists say that because the proposed rail route cuts through a lot of wetlands, a lot of paddy fields, it requires tunnels to be built through the Western Ghats. So there's going to be an insurmountable impact because of these developments. And the government has not carried out a proper environment impact assessment. What it has done is a rapid environment impact assessment, which really does not capture the full risks of doing this project. So environmentalists feel that by building a rail corridor that cuts through these fragile ecosystems is going to block drainage, going to block the flow of the water. it's going to create more floods and landslides, state which has already suffered enough.
Okay, and at this point, is the government listening to these concerns? Is there, any chance that it might reconsider its plans?
No, as of now, the government is very firm on implementing the project. The Chief Minister did a series of explanatory meetings in several districts where he did not interact with the public or those who are going to be affected by the project, but he invites eminent personalities, writers and academicians and people who are generally have an affinity to the left. He calls these people up at a convention hall or an auditorium and he goes on to explain the benefits of the project to them. But he doesn't take any questions and he leaves the room. So this is his way of explaining that the government is very firm on it. As you can see, the government has already started the process of land acquisition. It has already sent the detailed project report to the Railway Board. An approval from them is very important. But the state has already indicated that it has a financial package to acquire land as well and to compensate all those who will be affected by the project. So I don't think the government is going back on this project.
And in the end, we talk about a paper leak in Rajasthan. The Congress government in Rajasthan is facing a major embarrassment right now. And this is because a police investigation has revealed that the question paper for the Rajasthan eligibility examination for teachers was leaked last year. And the paper was stolen from an office of the State Education Department. In this segment, Deep Mukherjee, who reports on Rajasthan for the newspaper, tells us about this paper leak. Deep, to begin with, could you talk about the Rajasthan eligibility examination for teachers, which is essentially called REET? What is this examination for?
Yeah, so the Rajasthan eligibility examination for teachers, which is popularly known as REET, it is the eligibility test for the direct recruitment of primary and upper primary government school teachers. So for the purpose of applying, all the applicants need to clear this test. It is the basic prerequisite, and the examination was held on September 26th this year, and more than 16 lakh candidates were in the fray to appear for it. And last year, the examination saw a huge rush because it was being conducted after a gap of 4 years. And this examination is also very popular among the youth because of the fact that the number of posts are quite more than compared to other government examinations or recruitment examinations. There were like around 31,000 posts. So for 31,000 posts, more than 16 lakh people applied.
Okay, so the reason we're talking about this exam now is because we've learned that the examination paper for this exam was leaked. This is what police investigations have found out. And when this paper was being held last year, there was even a statewide internet shutdown, and the Rajasthan government even faced criticism for it. But despite doing a shutdown, despite taking measures, how did the paper get leaked?
Yes, that is actually quite ironical because before the examination, there was talk about internet suspension. And at the day of the exam, internet was suspended in most of the district headquarters where the examination was taking place. And it caused a huge inconvenience to the public. And also it resulted in severe criticism for the Congress government in the state across the country because the incident was so one of a kind, like shutting down internet because of a recruitment exam, that it was noticed and it grabbed national headlines. So all this was done on the reason given by the government was that to ensure that there are no irregularities in the examination process. But the irony is that now investigations by the SOG, the Special Operations Group of the Rajasthan Police, have revealed that the internet was suspended on the day of the examination, which was September 26th. But it happens that the question paper for REET was leaked 2 days before the examination on September 24th. And that was leaked from the office of the education department itself, where the papers had arrived and was kept in a strong room. So that's when it was leaked.
Okay, so now what action have authorities taken against those who leaked the paper? And also the results of the paper have already been announced. So what happens to those after this development?
So now that we know that cheating happened in at least several places in the state. The examination, whether it will be cancelled, the government hasn't hinted so far that it will be cancelled. The government has given this reasoning that cancelling the exam or deferring it or conducting it once again would result to inconvenience to the lakhs of aspirants who gave it in the first place, who appeared for it. So that's why it is yet to be seen like what is decided in terms of the validity of the exam. As for the investigation, the SOG have arrested so far 35 people, including several of the aspirants who had received the paper after it was leaked from the office of the education department, Shiksha Sankul in Jaipur. So it has been found in the investigation that one person called Ram Kripal Meena, who was engaged by the district coordinator for Jaipur for REET in Shiksha Sankul, had stolen the paper and he had leaked it. And till date, he has received around rupees 1.22 crore in exchange of that question paper, the SOG officials have revealed. So the government is saying that the investigation is being conducted in a fair and independent way, and more culprits will be nabbed. But as for the validity of the examination, they are still deciding about the course of action.
Also, we have seen such paper leaks in the past as well, and they too have created controversies. And we understand that the Rajasthan government is now planning a bill specifically against question paper leaks. Could you talk a bit about that?
Yes, so apparently the government has said that in the upcoming budget session, they will be bringing a bill to ensure that there are stringent conditions and a law against those who are involved in cheating, copying, or sending dummy candidates to examination centers. So that has also been done as a way of defense, because the opposition has been consistently raising the clamor demanding a CBI probe, accusing the government involvement of ministers of the Rajasthan government or senior politicians in the paper leak case. So that is one of the issue. And the government has said that it will be bringing in that law in the upcoming budget session.
You were listening to Three Things by the Indian Express. Today's show was written and produced by me, Shashank Bhargava, and was edited and mixed by Suresh Pawar. If you like the show, then do subscribe to us wherever you get your podcasts. You can also recommend the show to someone you think will like it, share it with a friend or someone in your family. It's the best way for people to get to know about us. You can tweet us at Express Podcasts and write to us at podcasts@indianexpress.com.